MC Fireside Chats, a weekly show featuring conversations with thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and outdoor hospitality experts who share their insights to help your business succeed. Hosted by Brian Searl, the founder and CEO of Insider Perks, empowered by insights from Modern Campground, the most innovative news source in the industry.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl with Insider Perks. Super excited to be here with you for one of our kind of unique episodes that we have throughout the year, this fifth week of the month. So normally, as many of you who have watched this show know, we have kind of a panel of recurring guests, and we have different themes for every week. And so this kind of fifth one is a little weird. It's an outlier, but honestly, it kind of gives us more of a chance to talk to our special guests and learn more about them, whereas we might have 5 or 6 people on other episodes. So super excited to, we're going to let these guys introduce themselves here, but welcome Don Bennett. And is it Louis or Louis?
Louis.
Louis, okay. I was going to say that, and then I always go with the wrong one. It never fails me. So Louis Thompson. And I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves. We do have Melissa, who's going to join us from Virginia State Park. She's having some trouble with her audio and video, so hopefully she'll be able to join us as well. But let's start with you, Don. Recently sort of half retired, as I joke with you, but not really. All kinds of new things going on. So what's up in your world?
Yes. So basically, other than running our 2 family campgrounds in the Finger Lakes, we at Merchantry Tourism, a company that my wife and I own, Anderson Brochure Distribution Service is a division of that. And we have already accomplished 20 different consumer-facing shows where we have distributed campground brochures, state directories, county and state travel guides, and information at 20 different shows. Out of the 20 shows we've done, 19 have been RV shows. We've got 4 more shows coming up, 2 in August and 2 in September. And we've got some big ones coming up. The Allentown Fair has about 250,000 plus attendees each year. The New York State Fair, 1.6 million attendees. So those are in August. And September, we've got a Fall Cleveland show that's very popular. And we will also be doing the Hershey show as well. And I would recommend it.
Fully retired is what you're saying.
Well, yes, and I haven't even gotten to the association work that Merchantry Tourism is doing as well. So we're doing some work for a couple of states. And February 1st, I was named the executive director of the Illinois Campground Association. So we're looking forward to helping them build their association. And we've got a few legislative objectives that they would like to see accomplished as well. So, but that's pretty much what we've been up to.
Well, let me let Louis introduce himself and talk about nomadic resorts briefly. And then I want to talk to you, I want to unpack a little bit about how your camping season has gone so far at your campgrounds, because we kind of are seeing, ups and downs and peaks and valleys and different things throughout the industry. So I think your insight in that would be great. And of course, Merchantry Tourism, I want to talk about Illinois. I remember going there with Walter, bless his heart, rest in peace, who was the executive director of that association for a while. We had it in a little trailer, with 6 people, I think, in it. And I went to speak. And so it's going to be interesting to see some of the good things that you have in store for that association too as well. So Louis, and we have Melissa. Welcome, Melissa. We can see you. Can we hear you? Oh, we can't hear Melissa.
No, here I am.
Oh, there you are. Okay. I thought we had another problem. Okay, so then we're going to let Melissa introduce herself too. So Louis, please.
Okay, my name's Louis Thompson. I'm the CEO of Nomadic Resorts, and I'm in Mauritius, so quite a long way from you guys, right across the other side of the world, near Madagascar. And I guess I work in probably the kind of, more luxurious side of outdoor lodging. So we design tented camps, safari lodges, floating resorts, and kind of sort of slightly outlandish looking bamboo buildings. And we do that a little bit all over the world, but mainly in Asia. And recently, I've been working on lots of different things, including, a camp opposite Mount Everest called Kunda Nest, which is overlooking Mount Everest, which is quite fun. And then I've also been nominated as the president of the Asia Pacific Outdoor Lodging Association. So what that's all about is we're basically trying to put a little bit of, let's say, trying to make things a little bit more coherent in terms of how glamping is perceived throughout Asia, which is a bit complicated because there's lots of different places with very different regulations.
Yeah.
So that will be kicking off very soon. And we'll be launching that kind of really officially at the Phuket Sustainable Travel Forum in September. And then also recently we have a thing called the Eco Resort Network every year. So that's a kind of it's a conference, but in a very cool and chilled out way. It's a sort of a conference where people involved in the design of tents or people with specialist knowledge of glamping and eco resort design, some investors, some people from different outdoor lodging brands. For example, we had Victor from Collective Retreats who came this year all the way from the US, and that was in Mauritius this year. So that's been a really good fun week, really.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive into Nomadic. I was telling you before the show, I keep seeing all your amazing innovations and the things you're working on LinkedIn, and I'm really excited. I'll make sure we figure out some way to screen share here, because unless we screen share and show some of your amazing creations, I don't think people are really going to grasp the magnitude of what you've built over there and what you are building for other people. And then maybe if we have time, if you're willing, I'd love to dive in and maybe have a conversation about Asia Pacific and how that region views glamping and how maybe it's a little bit different from the UK or the States or where I am in Canada, because I think those insights, kind of sharing those globally as you did at the glamping show a few years ago, is probably invaluable for everybody to hear. So, all right, Melissa, Virginia State Parks, welcome.
Thank you. So thank you for having me today and for your patience as we worked out the technology side of things.
Of course.
So I am Melissa Baker. I am Director of Virginia State Parks in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have 42 state parks in the public sector of camping and lodging. Our state park system was created in 1936 with 6 state parks built by the Civilian Conservation Corps. We have both cabins and campgrounds for people's accommodations, and then some niche things like a few yurts and a few camping cabins. We tend to provide a more primitive type of camping accommodation than the private campgrounds do, but not entirely primitive. So we do have electric hookups and water hookups and things like that. But we don't have all of the amenities that the private sector offers.
Which I think is an interesting topic of conversation, and maybe we can just start with you briefly for a second. We've had a lot of, obviously we're a show that is, I think it's fair to say, primarily geared toward private campground owners and operators, given just modern campground and where that audience started and it's carrying on through. And so I think we've had many guests on the show who previously have talked about things like, well, I don't like my state park and I don't like my national parks because they're taking away my business. And that's not really what's happening, honestly. In 95% of cases, is that some people are going to like the state park experience one week, and then the next week they're going to want to take their whole family and jump in a huge heated swimming pool. And so I think there's a lot of crossover here that actually helps both with discovering nature and being outdoors, but being outdoors in different ways. And so I think it just, in my mind, it helps people be outside more. Is that a sentiment that you share? Or?
It is a sentiment that I share. I think that as a public recreation manager, we have to be aware of our role in, let's say, the ecosystem of provisions of camping and lodging. We tend to, in state parks, we tend to cater to those campers that want a little more than the national parks provide, as well as far as amenities. But we certainly do not provide the level of amenities that the private campgrounds offer. And so I think you're right. I think that we do have some niches in the people that come to us, but we have a lot of overlap, because you're not always wanting the same experience. Just as in the hotel industry, you may want an economy hotel here or a really luxury hotel here. You may want something that's connected to a resort or not connected to a resort.
Until you see what Louis built, and then you're only going to want that. But that's another story.
Well, as a public sector, we probably can't afford that. So I think I'll be okay. I'll just come visit what Louis is building. But I think we do have the ability for folks to enjoy a range of opportunities. And I think they do slip in from the more primitive to the more developed, sometimes even in the same trip, because you might be willing to do a couple days of really primitive camping, but then you may not want to do all your days of primitive camping, and you may want to go into a more developed area with more amenities.
So I'm curious, just to, for the people who are on here who are mostly, I think, private campground owners, operators, suppliers of those people, real estate professionals, stuff like that. Can you walk us through like kind of and don't give away your secrets, right? But just from a Virginia State Park a government situation.
Mm-hmm.
How are the decisions made with how to, obviously funding is a whole nother animal that we don't have time to unpack here, that we'd love to give you more of it, right? But how do you choose to make the decision of, I see people more pivoting toward glamping, or I see people with longer rigs and need to, how do you decide where to go with Virginia State Parks from a camping perspective?
So one thing about the public sector is that we do have a lot of processes and a lot of public processes. Our foundational public process in Virginia State Parks and in many state park systems and federal systems is our master planning process. So in Virginia, we are required to conduct a public process for master planning of a state park, either when we acquire the park or significant new land, or every 10 years we have to refresh that. And we ask the public to come in, both the users and stakeholders, to come in and to give their perspectives of what the park could be or should be and how we would develop camping there. And so at a foundation, it's our master planning process that helps us determine at what level of amenities we're going to provide overall. But then there's the more nimble side of things that I know our private sector partners also deal with, is the evolution of the camping industry and the equipment that's there, and how we have to handle on a site-by-site basis. So often when you think of public recreation, you think of these big forested areas with lots of trees. And often that is the case, not always. And length of camping unit or camping pad and width for the pull-outs and things that are in the new materials. That's something that we constantly have to adjust for. But our larger term planning processes go on that 10-year cycle for a 30-year plan, and we involve the public in that.
May I ask a question, Melissa?
Yes.
When you say, a typical plot, so how big is a typical plot in one of your campsites or in one of the state parks?
Oh, are you asking about the dimension of the campsite?
Well, yeah, approximately, yeah.
That is a great question, and I can't tell you that off the top of my head. I could definitely try to find that information for you on some of our more recent plans, but I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head what that dimension is.
Do you have a sense of the average size of rig or length that typically stays in a state park? Is it 30 foot or is it?
It is getting larger. I can't tell you exactly what the footage is. I have folks that are in my planning division that are more focused on the length of the rig and how we design around the length of the rig, to be honest. Okay. But I know that we continually to see that being pushed larger, and that can be a challenge for us in some of our campgrounds that were designed in the 50s. because that's the
Same
reality
thing
of
with private
what we
campgrounds.
have. Is that we have parks that maybe haven't had significant investment in their campground for decades, and that ability to be nimble to accommodate those is challenging.
Yeah, I mean, the world is honestly like the world that what we've had, and Don, maybe you can weigh in on some of this as you go to the different RV shows and things too. I know you're like focused on your campground and you're focused on merchant tourism, but you certainly, as you go to these RV shows, have a sense or picking up of what the consumer behavior is and what models they're looking at and things like that. And so I think it's interesting. I've heard a lot of talk recently about this shift toward downsizing, and it's kind of the way it's always been, Louis, right? In Europe and in Asia, there's never been that kind of big, huge Class A 60-foot crazy thing that the Europeans don't drive that stuff around, right? For the most part. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. It wouldn't be very practical. I was surprised when I was in the US a few years ago, just the scale of the country, the size of the roads, all that's very different. In Europe, we have, pokey little medieval cities and they've got little tiny roads and you wouldn't be able to get anywhere. You get stuck. You get stuck. Half of France, half of Italy, you'd get stuck.
Slovenia too. I'm trying to picture now. I'm picturing the roads I just drove down. Yeah.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work. But, but it would be interesting. I think, also we don't have that RV culture in Europe so much. I mean, there is to a certain extent, but definitely not to the same extent as in the US. And I love that kind of side of the US outdoor lodging experience. I'd love to design actually an RV at some point. Maybe we'll do one in bamboo one day. But I think, when I think about that, I do think, however, that in Asia, it could become a thing because, you've got massive, if you went on a serious road trip across Asia, particularly thinking of Southeast Asia, you could go to Malaysia, Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, you could do some pretty amazing trips. So I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of thing picks up a lot more in the Asian market over the next few years. But in Europe, no, we have those little, the old Volkswagen camper vans from the 60s. That's more the kind of scale of being RV.
Well, and that's why I brought it up, right? Because I was talking, Melissa's talking about the size of her sites and how things have, for a number of years, as we've known in the RV industry, been shifting kind of to bigger, flashier, more luxury. But now I think, and Don, I'd love to have you weigh in on this too. I think there's been more of a shift from the guests we've had on this show, at least, specifically in the RV industry with the Dealers Association, who's a regular guest on our show in the fourth week. I've said kind of there's a trend towards now smaller and more downsizing and more of those, not maybe all the, like certainly there is an increase in camper vans, but not maybe all the way down there, but to the Class Bs, Class Cs, things like that. Is that what you're kind of seeing, Don? And I think that ends up helping state parks.
Well, I think, it does definitely help state parks. We are seeing smaller units. And I think, this goes into the baby boom retirement generation wanting to see the country. And so they don't need the space. The other thing that I'd like to point out is when you have an experienced camper that's going to travel, meaning move it from space to space, park to park, state to state, they're going to get something a little bit more easy to handle, so to speak. For those people that are either new to the industry or they're going to basically park for longer term, those are the ones that are still looking for 2 bedrooms, one and a half
from home, yeah,
and things like that. So with that being said, it definitely the smaller units definitely help on many occasions for independent campgrounds as well as state parks. In New York, our state park system has 16,000 campsites in it. Where I was executive director of the private association for so long. And one of probably the biggest things we actually had it come up that I'd love to see some of the states address is we have a health permit at our campgrounds that our health department, it's a state code for campgrounds. But in New York State, the state parks don't have to adhere to any of that. So where I had an issue this weekend is, we had a guest that wanted their son with their truck camper to have a second unit on a campsite. And our health department code says 1 camping unit per campsite. The state park does not say that. So, I guess to level playing field on certain things like that would be ideal. But without those 16,000 campsites, obviously the private sector wouldn't be able to absorb all of that demand either. So, it's kind of a thing where we'd like to maybe work together a little bit more. But when you have two sets of rules, it's a little challenging at times. Well, how come I can't do this? I do this there. But
that's just New York. Let's not lump Melissa in.
It is.
New York.
I'm not
the beautiful state of Virginia that's perfect in everything that they do. So
I don't know about that, but I will say that in Virginia we are required to meet the same rules through the administrative code set out by the Department of Health as the private campgrounds.
Yeah.
But
So I think that there's a lot of variation across the states of that requirement.
It just increases your creativity though, right, Don? Like you just have to because the guest is always right? So I assume you took a welder out and you just combined both rigs into like an L shape so they could stay, right?
Probably not, no. We try not to touch the guests' equipment. But with that, to jump back to the smaller units, one of the things, our original campground, I'm the third generation owner. We just started our 62nd season. And everything is a strain when everything is 50 amp plus, when the fifth wheels come in with 3 air conditioners on them. It definitely strains the infrastructure of the parks, and the smaller units, not only do they fit nicer on the campsites, but they generally don't require the same level of electricity that some of the big ones do. So yes,
so reverse chopping them in half then is not a solution and splitting them on 2 sites.
Well, strangely enough,
just trying to think outside the box here, Don.
I've looked at all of Louis' stuff, and it's amazing. But I also was just at the Florida conference and the Texas conference, and they had a park model guy there that they 3D print them for rental cabins and accommodations. So I think we're really on the cusp of some great experiential getaways for our consumers.
Well, you've handed me a transition to Louis now. I might as well just take this. I'm not sure if Louis actually uses 3D printing yet or has explored it, but certainly it is, I think, dramatically going to change the innovation with which designers can shape what is in their head. Is that fair, Louis?
Oh yeah, definitely. So it's actually a very interesting topic. It's funny you should mention it today. So basically, 3D printing, it's still relatively expensive as a building technology in relation to the cost, per square foot of conventional construction. But it does bring up an interesting conversation. So I was having a chat with a woman called Liz Lambert. I don't know if you ever heard of this woman, in Texas.
No,
she has a campsite called, it's kind of hybrid thing called El Cosmico, it was called.
Okay.
And she's actually building the first 3D printed hotel, I think, in the world almost, with a very famous architect called the Barker Yingles Group.
Okay.
And so I was literally just on a call with her last night, and they're going ahead with that project, which is a big scale project where they're 3D printing, kind of pods and homes, incredible spa, all sorts of things. So that's a pretty significant innovation. I think it's great. I think it's really interesting. We could do really organic shapes, but I do have a few reservations in terms of like people losing their jobs. I think it's a little bit like the AI thing. Is that I would find it very sad, being not only a designer but also a builder. It would be quite sad to see traditional trades disappearing as everyone goes and sort of 3D prints like a kind of Martian pod and whatever. But it's an interesting technology. But I tend to prefer the more kind of natural building techniques and traditional construction methodologies. Really, in some ways, it's difficult, interesting.
Yeah,
question.
I mean, they both have their pros and cons, and certainly, I think I'm with you that I like 3D printing is not where it needs to be quite yet, and I never want to see. This is the things that we deal with our company. Like we're heavy into AI. I have 35 people working for me, and it's the same conversations that we have daily as we automate tasks. Like I don't want to get rid of people, but I want to figure out how I can upskill you. Like what I do or don't do is not going to change where the future is going. So help me prepare you the best I can for right. So anyway, that's another discussion we don't need to get into. But
Can I ask you a question about something about the small rigs just before we go off that topic?
Yeah,
I did have a fourth thing I'd just like to bring. In Europe, there's this thing, I don't know if you've got it in the US, I suspect that you do, which is a kind of van life trend where young people, mostly sort of Gen Z and Gen Y people, kind of retrofit traditional vans into camper vans as opposed to buying a camper van already done. Is that something that has some traction in the US, people doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Don could speak more to how many people he's seen doing that, but we've certainly had guests on the show who have been those people, right? Who have showed us the vans that they've customized and even turned them into small businesses where they're selling these things in a boutique, like, 1 to 10 units a year that are handcrafted and really nice. Is that, Don, have you seen some of that? Or
Yes, we've absolutely seen quite a bit of that with the customizations of, they go all the way from, the new Sprinter van type conversions, not to name a brand, but to all the way to some of the, I guess, relic schoolies and some of the conversions of old school buses over to rolling tiny homes, as many refer to them, and they've been coined as schoolies. So, but we have seen quite a bit more than that. A lot of that going on, and I think it's going to continue as the campsite, I think, somewhat becomes the commodity for us. The location, of course, and what they can do outside of the campsite is really what I see the future as, and the experience that the guests are able to have.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, and we'll touch on it when we look at what Louis is doing here. But I think there's two frames here, right? There's experiential hospitality, which is maybe a buzzword, maybe not, right? But the experience of what we're going to see, that some of the things that Louis is building, right? But I think you're right, Don. Like from a campground or campsite perspective, there's not $1 million, $2 million project budgets or higher, right? In a lot of cases, to do some of the things that architects can envision and all the stuff that we're about to look at from Louis' side. And so there's certainly a place for that in the United States, and there's amazing projects being worked on. But for the majority of campground owners, I think that's location, right? It's yes, the service, it's the experience that you provide to, even as something as small as we talk to clients, right? Like we used to go to DoubleTree and get the home baked cookies, right? It just changes your whole perception of the guest service and the experience and the little touches of having the local organic soaps in the bathroom or whatever it is, right? And so from campsite perspective, yeah, I think that's important to maybe not focus on, that's the wrong word, but realize that there's only so far you can take a campsite, and then figure out what you can do even within your park off the campsite to enhance that experience. Is that kind of what you're saying, Don? Or
yes, absolutely. For instance, we're on one of the Finger Lakes, and we've been adding more and more water amenities. We just picked up a 18-foot stand-up paddleboard that you can get
18 foot.
And it's just what can the family do together and have some great experiences. Because sadly, whether they park their RV in their driveway or in a campsite, if they go in their RV to take a nap on a Saturday afternoon and they wake up, they're still going to look at the same walls. It's what happens outside. And that's where, we've got to try to have as many amenities as possible, great things for people to do. And, again, a lot of it's location for folks traveling, but for, quick weekend getaways for folks, the radius of guests and the distance from home generally is not as great. And when people are watching their pennies a little bit more, they tend to travel. That circle from home becomes a little bit smaller. So we have to up our game with as many amenities as we're able to put in, and that's pretty much been, our philosophy. So
I don't want to dwell on this, but I'm trying to picture an 18-foot paddle board. I thought I had a big, wide paddle board, and it pales in comparison to, I imagine it's wide and it's super stable. So I'm picturing the family and the little bratty teenager rocking back and forth to mess up dad on purpose. But I imagine it's really probably super stable, isn't it, at 18 foot?
It is, but that's what it's all about, right? Knocking that off. So.
Yeah, I'm not. Anyway, so before I go to you, Louis, I just had one more question for Melissa. Melissa, do you see this trend at some of the state parks? Can you speak to a little bit of the shift toward either van life or smaller rigs, or is that something that Virginia State Parks, and I know you have a lot of people on your team, so if you can answer.
No, we do see a lot of these smaller rigs. A lot of the pressures come from the larger ones, because if we can accommodate the larger ones, we can accommodate the smaller ones as well. So a lot of what we have to manage around is the larger rigs, so that a site can fit everyone that we possibly can. But we are seeing a lot of the hard-sided pop-ups and small campers that people are staying in. We do see some conversions of folks going in and making their own campers. I wouldn't say that that's a large percentage of what we see, but definitely we are seeing some of that innovation and creativity that especially some of the new adoptees to the camper life are bringing with them, they aren't necessarily going to invest that large dollar amount in their rig, but they've got a lot of creativity and ability to customize. And so we are seeing some of them.
I think it's really interesting, as we've seen, and I hate to ever say anything good came out of COVID, because that's a weird thing to just hear somebody's, come out of their mouth. But it's really interesting, the innovation I think that we've seen, and it started to be clear a little bit before, but I think it got accelerated through there. The new blood that's come into the industry, not just from a guest perspective, but from an entrepreneurial perspective, who, these new people are bringing ideas to what, and I maybe unfairly am going to call it a stale industry, and people will get mad at me, right? But the RVs have kind of looked the same for a long time. Yes, we're changing the electronics, and maybe the length is bigger, and we're going to change the way the kitchen is laid out, but it really hasn't changed a lot. And so I think it's brought some new blood, especially from the smaller camper van side, that has given us some new products, experiences, and things that haven't and won't replace traditional RVs, but give consumers a different type of experience and choice.
And we've seen that in all aspects of our state park world. During the pandemic, our visitation rose by 14%. And I think that all of us in the industry were watching to see what was going to happen as we normalized out of the pandemic. And we've been able to keep our visitation, our day use visitation. Our campgrounds are still very, very busy. Our cabins are full. We found new visitors during that time, and they found something that they liked and had stuck with it. And that has brought people that haven't been there before, which brings ideas that weren't there pre-pandemic, and innovation that wasn't there pre-pandemic. And it's been an exciting time.
All right, I want to get to Louis, because I keep telling him like every 5 minutes I'm going to get to him, and then I ask another question. And so Louis, my first question to you before we look at some of the things that you've created is, walk us through the founding of Nomadic Resorts. What problem were you trying to solve? What was in your head when you said, I want to create this company that's going to do all these things?
Okay, that's a good question. Very good question, actually. So basically, my background was that I was working as the kind of head of sustainability for a hotel company called Six Senses Resorts and Spas, which was specialized in sort of super luxury, private villa resorts in Maldives and kind of remote locations, a very kind of fancy place to stay, very expensive place to stay. They put me in charge of a thing they called it the Tented Camp Task Force, which makes it sound like a Ninja Turtle. But what it was basically we were kind of being asked to research, what were going to be the trends in the kind of safari lodge tented camp area. And at that time, I was working as project manager on a very, very, and you might find this a bit funny actually. So basically, I was working on a private island, but it wasn't a private island. It was an island off the coast of Thailand and Cambodia called Koh Kud. And the owner of Six Senses at that time, called Sonuship Dasani, he had a kind of even more exclusive brand called Soniva. He still does. And he wanted to build this super luxury tented camp. And when I say super luxury, I'm really not kidding. So we had a kind of massive site with 2 beaches, primary rainforest overlooking, the Gulf of Siam in Thailand. Very, very kind of tropical, exotic place. But to give you an idea of what kind of effort goes into those things, at one point, it was a very delicate site. It was a lot of wildlife. It was very complicated in terms of access. There's a lot of very sloped and steep inclines to get to different parts of the site. And so we built these first tensile membrane villas, which are it's kind of glorified tent. But to give you an idea, we actually sold some of those tented villas as residential units, branded residences. So I think I'm probably one of the few people been involved in a project where we managed to sell a tent for $6 million. So that project was very, very hectic, actually. And it didn't go really, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, it didn't go quite according to plan. And at one point, we had 1,200 workers on site and on a small island. And that takes quite a toll on the environment.
Yeah.
So at the end of this project, which was, it was a private airport, it was, all this kind of fancy stuff, 2 jetties, speedboats, a kind of, not really a yacht, but a kind of cruise boat and all this different stuff. Firstly, I thought, this is just way too complicated to do this. I've been working on it for 4 years. And secondly, it was way too expensive, because even when you're selling villas at that price, it's a big price to set up that kind of thing. So at the end of the project, we sat down, the people who had actually executed the project, and we sat down and we said, okay, what would you do differently? And that was when we started designing the first tents. And maybe I can show you that now if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah.
And then you'll see a little bit, where
I'm on your projects page. Is that where you want me, or somewhere else?
Can I share my screen? I'll show you something.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. So I'll give you, so basically this was the first tent. So it was quite different. So basically when we came out of it, we were like, okay, what should we have done differently in this super uber luxury thing? And what we concluded is everything should have been modular and prefabricated and put together like a kind of big Meccano set. And so then you could have built stuff in, a factory in Bangkok, shipped it to the island on a barge, and had a small number of people to erect it. And that was basically the principle. But at the same time, we knew that the kind of target market for this kind of luxury product, they needed to have all the bells and whistles. So it was a little bit of a challenge to work out a kind of compromise between those two things. So these are the 3 main models we've got at the moment, but we also do bespoke tent models. So we ended up creating this, which is the Looper. And what this was a kind of effort to create a luxury hotel room that could be disassembled, taken to pieces and moved, which is quite a complicated endeavor.
Yeah, sounds like
it. Sewage treatment, you've got your HVAC, you've got ensuite bathrooms, and you've got all this other kind of stuff. So we designed this tent, which has 2 layers. On the external layer, the fly sheet, you've got a architectural membrane PVDF fabric, which lasts like 15, 20 years. Then you have a layer of insulation, and then you have this interior liner with this kind of quite fancy detail, which means that basically that sandwich is a thick layer of insulation. We also put double glazing on them. We put a key card, a lockable door, so that really this thing has all of the amenities, I guess you call them, of a luxury hotel room, but is nevertheless, in essence, a tent. So yeah, some of them had swimming pools. One of the first ones we built. So, it took us a long time to do this. In fact, I sometimes say it took us 10 years to pitch a tent, which I'm sure
that's how entrepreneurship works, right? You're an overnight success, 10 years in the making.
Yeah, right. I'm sure Don wouldn't want anybody spending 10 years but pitching a tent in his campsite. But it is quite different from other tent modules. I mean, first, it's big. It's 43 square meters. It's 4 meters high, 5.6 meters wide, and 9 meters long. So this is quite a big piece of kit, and that's why I asked if what was the typical size of a plot, because I guess actually some of the bigger RVs are probably not too far off. Well, maybe not quite as big as this, but probably not far off. So then we then designed all the internal furniture, the cubicles, the fixed furniture, wardrobes, and all this. And I suppose there's a lot of crossover with RV design in this. Is that there's a similar process that goes on. And those are the first tents we did, and we did those for a safari lodge in Sri Lanka. We did 28 of them there, and then we've just completed another 34, right in the middle of a city, which is something that I absolutely didn't expect, in the middle of Athens. And we've got several other projects where we're putting these in, and I think this is actually quite interesting for kind of RV or campsite owners who want to get into glamping and want to go into the higher end of the market, maybe because they've got an exceptional site, or maybe they just want to make get a significantly higher room rate. So do you feel like this is the key here, right? Is we talked about location, right? I feel like these certainly will attract that, no doubt, right? There's no argument this is going to attract that luxury higher end market. But that luxury higher end market is not going to go to one of these plopped in the middle of an RV park. No, but there could be a part of an RV park with particularly good views over the lake or something, right, where you might want to put some more or river frontage or lakefront, or And it also depends where you are. If you're within kind of striking range of a big metropolitan city with high net worth people, we're seeing a lot of inquiries, and you see companies like Collective Retreats, Auto Camp, all these companies that you guys I'm sure know, who commanding quite high room rates for their products, and I think there is definitely a market for it. Okay, so continue your story. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Okay. And then anyway, next one we did, the first one was based on the shape of a caterpillar cocoon. Is there a reason for that? Like, I know, because it fascinates me, right? I'm a geek, and maybe our audience won't be as fascinated as I am, but it fascinates me what you said about how people don't imagine that all of this work goes into creating a product like this. They just think we bought a tent and it's fine, right? Yes, there's some differences. So these tents are designed to withstand 140 km/h wind speeds, and we've got a new model that's hurricane proof for 280 km/h wind speeds. I suppose in America, I'm not quite sure what that equates to. I think 140 is probably enough to be fine. 19 or not far off 100 miles per hour winds. We also did thermal models, computational fluid dynamics to work out how the air would flow through. And then another thing is the fabric that we use. These things are going to last 20, 25 years. So, which is probably also not that far off of how, the lifespan of a fancy RV I would have thought, but I don't know anything about it. But wouldn't it be great to have one of these with wheels? So, a lot of time and effort, a lot of engineering, a lot of money probably went into the design over the years, I guess. But it kind of changed the perception of safari lodge tents at the time that we built these first ones, I think. And so why do you think no one did this before, the modular? Do you think they just hadn't thought about it or taken the time to invest in the brain power to create it, or? Well, listen, I'll explain this in a kind of simple... Please, go ahead. If I'm interrupting you, just tell me to shut up. It's fine. No, because I don't want to... The show is way better when I shut up anyway. No, I don't want to monopolize the conversation at all either. So because I worked in the hospitality industry, I was seeing how much it cost to build these kind of luxury resorts. And it's costing even in Sri Lanka, they were looking at $350,000 development cost per key. So, that's quite a lot of money. And that was back in 2018. It's probably a little bit more than that now. And I think in America now, you probably see much higher development costs. And when I take development costs, I'm taking the whole of the project divided by the number of rooms, including restaurants, bars, whatever else you've got in there. So the thing is that we're commanding the same or higher room rates as the luxury resorts. So, the family Looper goes for like $1,200 a night. That's the Looper tent and this Urchin tent together. They've been sold for $1,200 a night, got fantastic reviews, and been going on strong for 5-6 years. So once what it came down to was I was like, well, when we're building these resorts, we're doing a sequential traditional construction methodology. You're excavating the ground, you're pouring your footings, you're pouring your slab, etc., for each one. Whereas, which is quite time consuming, and okay, you can have different crews going sequentially, but basically the big difference was this was, you could manufacture all the individual elements in parallel and then bring them all to site and kind of put it up in a much faster time frame. Because I've worked on resort projects that have taken 5 years to build, So I think that's one of the things that's a major contributor to the success of this. So we started off with the big one, then we did an 18 square meter one, which is much more affordable and kind of cute. It looks like a pickled onion, but it's actually based on a sea urchin. And then we moved on from that. And then I had an idea when I came back to Mauritius in 2019. And this is, you got different deck configurations. You can go fancy pants, or you can go like pretty simple. There are quite a few different options for this. But the other thing that we did, we also got the same thing of different fixed furniture. So after this, these are the Looper and the Urchin together. We created this, and this might be of interest to you guys because this can work in a glamping in a camping site. So what this was is a project called the Seed Pod, which was in a nature reserve. So this also might be interesting in terms of people who have state parks or campsites in areas of particular protection. So
just raise your hand, Melissa, when you're ready to buy.
But basically the idea of this was to create a tent that had all of that kind of engineering and thermal performance, but had no concrete footings and no physical impact on the land at all. So this is actually suspended from the trees on stainless steel cables. And then you have one stainless steel cable at the bottom that kind of anchors it back into the ground. And we basically tension it so it kind of pulls the top and the bottom apart to create this kind of rigid structure. So this was something that might work a lot more for glamp sites or for people. That's my wife and my daughter. As a kind of, and the idea of this was really to have this immersive nature experience where you could get some of that camping feel without really going full on, having a tent and being uncomfortable. It's that kind of space that I'm interested in, the thing where you maintain, those great elements of actually the traditional camping tented experience, but you combine that with a comfortable mattress, some lighting, a place to plug your phone because everybody has a bloody phone now. So to try and find that sweet spot of saying, okay, you can have a kind of glamping resort in one part, you can have something a little bit more, tree housey type thing in another part, and then maybe you can have a floating thing on the lake because we're doing a floating resort as well at the moment. So all of these things, and that comes to what Don was saying, was it's about the experience, right? People come to these spaces not only for the experience of their accommodation, but also for the experiences they can live in these different places. And that was one of the questions I have for Melissa. Actually, is in the parks, do you provide recreational activities, food and beverage, and that kind of thing at your campsites, or is it just the camping plots?
We do provide some recreational activities. So we are strongly oriented toward educational opportunities, interpretive programming, and things like that. We do provide some rentals of equipment such as canoes and kayaks that people can enjoy. We have some swimming opportunities. Most of them are natural swimming opportunities being located on lakes. As far as food and beverage, we don't have as much of that, certainly not at the campsite. We do have some snack bars and things like that in our day use areas primarily.
Okay. And do you have little shops there where people can buy, food and beverages or do like their shopping?
We have some shops that are catered mostly towards souvenirs and essentials that our campers may need once they're on site, or small consumables that someone might have while they're at the park for their activities. Larger things that people might want to buy, we encourage folks to go into their local community and support local businesses.
Don, I'm curious from your perspective, given your breadth of experience owning 2 campgrounds, working with merchantry, going to the tourism shows, seeing, and then obviously having the relationship with so many New York campgrounds over so many years. As you look at a product like Louie, and certainly you've seen all the other glamping products that have come to market recently, as a campground owner who would look at, or even with your experience, right, as you look to balance the natural type experience that like I'm very fond of, and certainly I feel like Louie shares that sentiment.
Yeah, definitely.
How do we as, well, not we, because I'm not a campground owner, I'm not brave enough. How do you as a campground owner balance, like, I want to provide that in some cases to my guests. Maybe I have the land, maybe it's not, maybe I've got that extra 50 or 100 acres that isn't zoned, or I don't want to necessarily bury sewer in and spend millions of dollars or whatever else, right? Right. How do I balance that? Or even, I have an extra plot of land on my campground with this needs a more private experience. It can make me as much money or more than 5 or 10 RV sites can, but it requires some outside of the box thinking.
So yes, very intriguing, great products, and a lot of the glamping experiential items. I did a little research before the show. Obviously, the Looper, amazing. Unfortunately, we would have to scale that back to 400 square feet or less. That's a requirement for where my campgrounds are located in New York State. But
is that for glamping accommodations, or is that? Yeah,
it's generally a camping unit needs to be 400 square feet or less, and it would be defined in the code as a tent. One of the biggest.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just trying to, for clarity's sake, does that have anything to do with the wheels, or because campground owners typically want stuff on wheels, right? So it classifies as park models, or no?
No, well, so many of the on-site rentals that we have might be a park model, cabins and things like that. They all have to be under 400 square feet.
Even if they're not on wheels, even if they're, because yours aren't on. Okay, that's what I was trying to understand. I'm sorry, it's maybe an ignorant question, but.
Yep. No, not at all. It's different everywhere. Where you are in Canada, they don't have such a rule. And, when we're up at Montreal and especially the Toronto RV show, to see some of the park models and some of the rental accommodations are absolutely amazing, but they range from 600 to 1,000 square feet, a lot of them. And, we just wouldn't be able to put them on site. So, the other piece would be that we struggle with is the zoning, towns, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and how we can, move development further. That's part of it. And then the second is capital structure. A good half of our campgrounds are only open really for 5 to 6 months out of the year. So, what would be the ROI on a project such as that also has to come into play versus a park with a climate that is open for the entire year. So that definitely has to play in it too. And again, it's based on the capital and longevity. And I'm amazed to hear that the tents that Nomadic is doing are able to sustain such winds and hurricanes. That's outstanding. A lot of the other stuff that's out there definitely would not sustain that. So I think that's definitely a great foot forward into making these a little bit more. I'm not going to say well received, but as a campground owner, we never want to put our guests in harm's way. I think that's a really neat avenue.
Yeah, I mean, we said right from the beginning, basically, I didn't want to be monitoring the weather every place that we put one of these things, hoping that it didn't get, severe weather conditions and that things get blown away or that anybody would be injured in any way. So that was always very, very important to us, because for the kind of luxury hotel market we had worked in at the start, that was kind of critical for their insurance as well, and yeah, I wonder, actually, bringing this up, Don, I think is an interesting thing, that one of the things that I've been concerned about over the years is, some of the glamping stuff that I've seen, even in the US, actually, I do wonder if one day there will be an accident, or, seeing the typhoons, and what do you call them? You call them twisters, I guess.
Typhoons are the hurricanes, I think.
Yeah, tornado, I mean.
Yeah,
tornado or hurricane. But, accidents could potentially happen. I went to a site in India, fantastic location, incredible kind of temple complex. They'd bought some fairly serious safari tents, and they had a kind of freak weather condition, and 6 of them got blown away with all of the expensive furnishings and stuff. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but that did kind of put an alarm bell in my head saying, if something like that were to happen on a large scale in the US, there might be legislation that comes into play, in consequence of an accident that may occur. Could be at a festival, for example. I don't know if you saw Burning Man last year, but this kind of super muddy thing.
Yeah, we did saw the news reports about it.
Yeah, so those kind of things, I think are important. I think I'm very glad that we've taken that very seriously from the outset.
So how do you, and I know we typically don't have people on here to give sales pitches, right? And so I'm not asking you to give that. But as you talk to, like, primarily our owners as private campground owners and operators in the US, I think there's clearly a demand, Don, would you agree, toward more experiential, unique accommodations? Certainly we're not taking anything away from the RV market, but there is this demand here that we're seeing. It continues to grow. In the United States, to be fair, I think is years behind where the UK and some of those countries have been from a glamping perspective. But as you look at this, put yourself in the shoes of a campground owner who Don just gave you some of his thoughts on, right? When does it make sense for me to do something, like even with the little one that hangs between the trees? Like, how would you, I guess, pitch that, for lack of a better word, right? But justify that in a campground owner's perspective of, I want to go through that hassle because it's going to be worth it to me.
Is this question to me or to Don?
Yeah, it's to you. I apologize. So I'm at, yeah.
Again, look, I think it's very clear. The data on this is totally clear and has been for a long time. I think people just haven't been paying attention. If you look at the search word trends, Booking.com, Expedia, this has been going on for years. People have been looking for unique accommodation in many different things, and that's been, that's gone from different RVs. And as I say, I think there's a lot of space for innovation in the RV market. I would love to do, some, the traditional, I don't know, you call it American wagons or Pioneer wagons, I guess.
Conestoga wagons. Yep. Yeah, we have those. Yeah. There's a couple of them.
I would like to do like a kind of pimp my ride version of one of those and do something that was really.
What would you do different? Just curious.
I definitely changed fabric. I changed, we can do all sorts of forms. We can do all sorts of different kind of openings.
Yeah, but what would you do? You're on the spot and we only have 45 seconds left in the show.
Okay, well, listen, what I do
no
is
pressure.
Basically, I'd basically modify the forms of it. I'd modify the shapes. I'd keep the same wheelbase, but do go for something that looks really contemporary, like a kind of floating cloud.
Very nice. Interesting. So where does Nomadic Resorts go from here? Last question.
We're super busy. We've got stuff going on all over the place. We've got, private islands in the Middle East. We've got the floating resort in Kerala. We've got our own brand, Nomadic Escapes, which we're setting up here, focused on adventure sports. So I'm a bit all over the place. I have been for quite a long time, I'm afraid.
Do you feel like your interest more is in towards building those full-fledged resorts or working with smaller, like both, obviously, but where would you lean more?
I'm not a particularly luxurious person myself, so all of that stuff doesn't really wash with me. I actually prefer to have a kind of more traditional camping experience, I guess. So I probably my personal taste, I can't really speak on behalf of the company, would be to go for a more kind of figure out some kind of cool pop-up glamping camping experiences, tree houses, those kind of things. Those are the areas, and not so expensive, and make it more affordable, so that a wider range of people. I want to get the kids off their phones and going out into the nature, and I think we all share that.
Yeah, I think for sure. So, well, we're unfortunately, like, again, as always, I'd love to continue this discussion even more. We've got an hour of all of your wonderful people's time, so I appreciate it. Any final thoughts, Don or Melissa?
I'll let Melissa go first.
I guess just thank you for having us. This has been really interesting to hear the different perspectives. One thing I love about camping and the outdoor experience is that there's a full spectrum of experiences that people want to have, and there's lots of passionate people in the business trying to provide those experiences. It's been my pleasure to spend this time with those of you on the panel to hear about your perspectives.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. And where can they learn more about Virginia State Parks?
You can go to VirginiaStateParks.gov. Perfect.
Don?
Yes. Brian, I want to thank you for providing the forum. And Louis, Melissa, also thank you for your learn a lot from both of you, as I hope your viewers will as well. We're excited to keep going with the shows, merchantrytourism.com for the shameless plug, and to keep the consumers in the outdoors, keep them camping, keep them interested. And I think as we move forward, the shows provide a great mechanism as a funnel to the campgrounds, the state associations, the tourism directors, the state parks, and that a great funnel to get them to their websites to make reservations. Basically, we're seeing pretty much pre-pandemic activity now. I think most people, where there's, we're seeing a bump in reservations when school lets out initially for the summers, things like that we historically have. It still seems a little bit busier, but don't forget, right before the pandemic, probably for about 10 years, we were already on the upswing with the outdoor. So I think the nice part is we're pretty much past pandemic, and we've got a lot of new campers and that from it that have stuck with it. We've got rid of some that unfortunately weren't good at it or didn't like it, but thought it would be a good idea to try. But I think we've retained a lot of people, and hopefully, we can go on, because being outdoors is so much healthier for everyone that partakes in it. So.
Well, and we'll have to have you back on the show, right? And same with Louis, because I remember it now. I'm thinking of all the things that I said I was going to get to and talk to you guys about that we never did. I feel like we had a good discussion, but there's a lot more interesting things we can talk about. So where can they find out more about whichever you want to promote? Or you said merchantrytourism.com.
Yes. Merchantrytourism.com is a great resource for that. IllinoisGoCamping.com is part of our new gig too. So if you're in Illinois, please use that as a resource for finding great campgrounds. And Louis, there's one of the first glamping into the big hotel chains is right in Chicago at the Gwen Hotel. They actually have a glamping tent. I think it's on the 13th floor. And they've had that for quite a while. So it's being that Marriott is coming in and Hilton is doing some things with AutoCamp now too. I think we're definitely getting some exposure to the outdoor hospitality industry that we've really not had before.
Yep, interesting times. Louis, wrap it up for us.
We www.nomadicresorts.com. So we also design things. We also have full architectural landscape master planning services that we do for people. And, it was a real pleasure to hear Melissa and Don talking about a side of the business I don't often get exposed to. So for me, it was really educational and super useful to hear from you and to hear your perspective on things. Because I forget, that the vast majority of people go camping or RV as they're coming to places that you guys are setting up. So well done you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it. I'd love to continue the conversation again when we have more time, but appreciate you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl. As always, we'll see you next week for another great open discussion show with some of our recurring guests, and hope you guys all have a great summer, success in your business, state parks, New York Finger Lake campgrounds, Louis over in Mauritius, and everywhere else you're playing with. Super excited. Thank you guys. Take care. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
This episode of MC Fireside Chats with your host, Brian Searl. Have a suggestion for a show idea? Want your campground or company in a future episode? Email us at hello@moderncampground.com. Get your daily dose of news from moderncampground.com. And be sure to join us next week for more insights into the fascinating world of outdoor hospitality.